Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another holotape from Forgotten Weapons. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we are digging deep into the vaults of historical antique firearms. We are going to take a look at a Chinese Type 93 assault rifle. Now, there are a lot of you are probably familiar with this rifle, or you're aware of this rifle, but you probably don't know all the details behind it. And there's some really interesting developmental history that went into the Type 93. So, before we take a close look at the rifle, let me give you just a brief overview of its history. The name, we know Type 93 is the official designation from a number of recovered Chinese official documents. However, there's no good indication of when these rifles actually went into production. So the name, the designation 93, would suggest 1993, which is certainly possible, but we don't see any historical record of these being produced until at least the mid-2020s. It's possible. What probably is going on is that the rifle, the design was put together in the 1990s, the early 1990s, 93, but not actually put into production for a couple decades after that. See, the thing is, this rifle is actually, it is designed to be best for a situation in which ammunition and other resources are becoming scarce. And of course, we know that's the situation in which they were used, the resource wars from the 2050s through, of course, 2077. So as petroleum and uranium became scarcer, especially petroleum, this led to a series of increasingly violent clashes between the United States and the People's Republic of China, which, well, ultimately ended in global thermonuclear war. But before that, there were a couple of operations that led to Type 93 rifles actually showing up in the United States. So one of them was on the West Coast with the Chinese invasion of Alaska. Of course, the Chinese came into Alaska looking to capture American oil fields, as Chinese oil fields were basically dried up by the 2060s. And then, interestingly, these rifles were actually smuggled into the United States in reasonably significant numbers, specifically around the capital area, around Washington, D.C., and sort of the upper East Coast. Now, the Chinese appear to have some plans for more significant infiltration operations, but those were all rendered kind of moot by the nuclear weapons that dropped in 2077. So, enough talking about the history of where this came from. Let's take a closer look at the rifle itself and what they did to change this, because this is fundamentally a Kalashnikov action rifle, but with a number of modifications made to it. This is really cool. This is a magnificently well-preserved Type 93. So let's start by taking a closer look at some of the markings. So here on the front left, we have the most important basic markings. We have the original manufacturing code. I should point out that 66 in a triangle, that's the factory. That is not Vault 66, that is Factory 66, part of the Norinco Consortium, the North China manufacturing group. We have Chinese characters here that say Type 56. Interestingly, this is not marked Type 93, it's marked Type 56. And to some extent that makes sense, given that this is fundamentally still a Kalashnikov pattern rifle, like the Type 56 that predated it. Clearly it was developed from the Type 56, and for whatever reason they opted to continue to use that designation on the rifle, although they did refer to it elsewhere as the Type 93. And then we have a serial number. Of course, the Chinese rifles, Chinese firearms, have serial numbers in our style of Arabic digits, simply because for very large incrementing numbers, like serial numbers, these digits make a lot more sense than Chinese numerical characters. On the other side, we have the selector markings, single and auto. And then here behind the safety lever, we have this property mark from the PLA. This is actually a pretty recognizable PLA sort of insignia. The 5-pointed star was, of course, widely used by the Communist government of China. And then the two characters inside are 8 and 1. And the 8-1 refer to August 1st, that is specifically August 1st, 1927, when the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, was originally founded. And so you'll see this symbology on virtually everything of the PLAs, including the Type 93 rifles. Now, the most unusual thing about the Type 93 is its ammunition and its magazines. So Obviously, this is a magazine that was designed for the 7.62 by 39 cartridge, which was a primary weapon or primary cartridge used by the PLA for, we think, about 100 years. However, all of the Type 93s that have been recovered in the United States don't actually use that cartridge. They use the same magazine, but they're chambered for the 5.56, I believe it was the NATO cartridge. And it's really curious to try and understand why they would use a magazine that is curved for a tapered cartridge like 7.62 by 39 while actually firing the 5.56 cartridge. And the best explanation that we've been able to come up with is, and this is partly based on some Chinese documentation, they wanted the rifles that were going to the United States, and we'll talk about in a moment how the rifles actually got to the United States. They wanted those rifles to use the 5.56 cartridge because that was the standard cartridge in use in the United States. So for ammunition compatibility reasons, they wanted to do that. However, by the time these rifles were actually in production, resources were becoming really quite scarce in China, and there was significant tooling cost that would have been involved in developing a whole new magazine to really properly fit the 5.56 cartridge. So what they did instead was they simply essentially bodged 7.62 magazines to hold 5.56 cartridges, and as a result, the magazine capacity of the Type 93 is only 24 rounds. In the original Type 56s, and we believe the Type 93s made in China for Chinese domestic use in 7.62 by 39, those magazines all held 30 rounds, but the examples that we found here in the US only hold 24. Following on that theme, of course, we know that the predominant geopolitical concern at this point in time when these were being manufactured was that of resources, of petroleum in particular, uranium and other fissile materials as well, to a lesser extent. Things were getting difficult to manufacture, and so the purpose of the Type 93 was actually to design a rifle that was perhaps less dependent on actual firing and a little more capable as a hand-to-hand weapon. So a lot of elements of this rifle have been beefed up to make it better at bayonet fighting. And there have been a couple other improvements over the original Type 56 as well. So if we go from the front of the rifle back, we can start with this muzzle brake. This is actually a substantially more effective muzzle brake than the original slant brakes that are found on the Type 56s. Note that they still have a bayonet lug. It has been canted about 45 degrees up to the side for reasons that aren't entirely clear. This is also longer. The distance between the muzzle brake and the bayonet lug is a bit longer than on a typical AK. Now, I know this is going to seem a bit strange. I don't actually have a Type 93 bayonet available, but I do have one from the earlier pattern, the Type 56 style of AKs, and you can see that if the bayonet lug is positioned here, the handguard ring at the front is too short. This won't properly fit. So we know that the Type 93 bayonets were lengthened, and that makes sense. This is intended to be a better hand-to-hand weapon. The Type 93 bayonets were larger, longer, heavier, more effective weapons. In order to support the use of the bayonet and strenuous bayonet fighting, the barrel and gas block assemblies, or gas tube assemblies of the Type 93 have been reinforced. So we have a reinforcing block here. And then a much heavier handguard has been added, which is particularly effective when held overhand in a bayonet fighting sort of posture. And it was getting difficult to manufacture a lot of new materials. These handguards were actually taken from also pre-war, in fact, predating even the Type 93s. These were taken from Type 56 RPD light machine guns and fitted to the new Type 93 pattern. The charging handle from the RPD was also used. This is a folding charging handle, and folding it up like this gets it out of the way and makes the gun a little smoother and a little less likely to snag on the user's own equipment when trying to engage in bayonet fighting drill. Now, it's not just about bayonet fighting. You can see that the front sight here, which is fundamentally the same style of hooded adjustable front post that you'll find on the Type 56 AKs, that front sight has been moved forward, slightly increasing the sight radius. We have windage adjustments here with these two adjustable screws And then the rear sight has been moved rearward. This does two things. It again increases the sight radius, making this a bit more effective, allowing more efficient use of every cartridge, which was becoming very important by the 2050s and 2060s. It also, of course, gets rid of the sight. The original sight was up here, which interferes with this new handguard design. So the rear sight here has been raised to clear the handguard. It's been moved back for a longer sight radius, better practical accuracy. There's really actually quite a lot going for this rifle compared to the original Type 56. Last but not least, we also have a significantly, to my mind, improved stock. These are all the Type 93s have folding stocks. So this pulls down and folds over to the side like so, and simply lifts up to re-engage. The length of pull has been made longer on these stocks. The original Type 56 stocks have actually very short length of pull. If I compare this is an original Type 56 side folding rifle. You can see that the length of pull has been increased by 1 inch or maybe 1.5 inches, which is going to make it more comfortable for a lot of people. Following the desire to make the guns a bit more rugged for bayonet fighting, there's been a little bit of reinforcement added to the receiver here. These are milled receivers, not stamped ones. The original Type 56s were made as both milled and stamped guns. The magazine release lever here has been made a bit longer than the traditional type, allows for a bit faster magazine changes. These do change magazines really quite rapidly. And of course, as you've already seen, the top cover is distinct from the original Type 56. Because it now has the sight on it, it's important to be able to keep that sight locked firmly in place. And so this design has a number of locking pins, essentially, that hold the top cover in place with the sight. So further reinforcement up here on the top. Now I can disassemble this just like a standard Type 56 with a few slight differences. Namely, once I've got the dust cover unlocked from the back here, I then actually have to pull the charging handle slightly back to allow the top cover to clear these locking pins. So if I pull that back, I can then lift off the top cover. And this is a very nice, heavy-duty, reliable, durable top cover. It is square for ease of manufacture. There's sort of a built-in ejection port here to prevent cases from bouncing back inside this dust cover. And then we've got, of course, our reinforcements there and our locking pin holes here. Internally, this is a standard Kalashnikov style of action. We do have a recoil buffer in there to help make it a bit more controllable. And a very standard bolt carrier, just with the RPD style of charging handle added to it. So how did we end up with a PLA rifle from 250 years ago here in the United States? Well, there are actually two real sources of Type 93 assault rifles in the continental United States. They both date from pre-war years, of course. One of them was the Chinese invasion of Anchorage. Of course, the Chinese were looking to capture American oil fields in Alaska, as they were essentially out of petroleum resources by that point. Now, the troops, the contingent that invaded Anchorage was armed in large part with Type 93 assault rifles. When that force was defeated, when the United States retook Anchorage, a fair number of Type 93s actually came back with American soldiers as war trophies, as souvenirs. And of course, some of them were simply lost in the area as detritus of battle. Now, perhaps more interestingly, there's a well-documented Chinese infiltration attempt on the east coast of the United States, actually disguised as a food processing facility in the Washington, D.C. area. And we know, again, from some captured Chinese documents, that they actually smuggled in, a significant number, more than you might expect, of Type 93 assault rifles. What appears to be the case, they were trying to get ready for a larger, sort of a fifth column military insurgency in the United States, in the capital area. That never ended up happening. We have found some documentation that suggests that importation, smuggling, was continuing and was interrupted in 2077 by the bombs. So that never came to pass, but a significant number of the rifles did come in before nuclear Armageddon struck, and so they can still be found more in the Washington, D.C. area and the middle upper east coast of the United States than in most places. They remain, for example, really quite scarce in the western and southwestern United States. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I would like to give a big shout out, a big thanks to Elder Alex of the Brotherhood of Steel for giving me access to this rifle to show to you guys, to share with you, and to document. Of course, you know the Brotherhood is a big proponent of preserving and documenting antique technology like the Type 93. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Thanks for watching.